thwarted. It gives me great pleasure, therefore, to present to you today the founder of the League, Miss Sylvia Scankert, singing for us a song which offers stage advice to the worried citizen. Sylvia's mother, the celebrated Emmeline Scankert, will accompany on the pianoforte.
All right, folks, it's time for Shiny Side Out with David Dunger and Necky. You're listening to Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com. You don't need to expect us. We're already here. Take it away, guys.
Welcome to Shiny Side Out with Dave.
And Mecky.
Live from the Sydney studios. Jump in the chat room at freedomslips.com while we're on air and follow us on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter. Check out shinysideout.net for the show archives, show notes, and all the links we paste into the chat during the show. Listen to us on FM on WZZR 101.3 in Kentucky. You know, there are so many other ways to listen to Revolution Radio on freedomslips.com, Revolution Radio app, TalkStream Live, TuneIn.com, Radio Tuner, Spreaker.com, iHeart, and Live 365. But you can also go old school if you wish and purchase a Grace Tabletop Radio. You can also listen to us, Meggie, when you're driving around in your General Motors vehicle with a receiver-enabled radio. All of these things are revolutions in radio. If you're in the U.S., you can call in on 347-688-2902 or just add Freedom Screen to Skype, and away we go. Meggie, there's some cause for celebration today, is there not?
There sure is, sir. This is show number 4 and 100, or if you count the way normal people do, 104.
104.
Which means that Dave and I have been on the air with you guys more or less constantly for 2 years. 2 years of us talking to you, and you are still listening. So thank you very much for that, guys, and thank you, Nighthawk, for keeping the station alive, and Dave and I talking.
Absolutely, and you know what, third place again last week, Mecky, and I'm really pleased.
Yeah, and again, it is all due to you, listeners, and you know, if you didn't listen, then we would make no place. So thank you very much for maintaining an interest in the things that we do bring to you. And again, today is no exception. In fact, today we have the Dogen of I guess you could call it the UFO research, the Grand Master, you know, and Dave will talk a bit more about him. But we are pleased beyond belief that we are able to bring him to you and you to him, as it were, because you are the audience. Dave, please do tell us a little more.
We have live on air tonight, and I say live. We have a nuclear physicist and a lecturer, author and co-author, has worked on highly classified projects, and I'm sure everyone who listens to this station is going to love this. He's worked for GE, GM, Westinghouse, TRW Systems, Aerojet, and General Nucleonics, and I can't wait to hear about that too, and McDonnell Douglas. He's been on countless TV and radio interviews, and it's about to do a +1, another one with us, Mecky. You know what? Can I say it?
Please.
Welcome to the show, Stanton Friedman.
Delighted to be here.
That's so awesome. Thank you, sir.
Made it this time.
We completely understand the situations. There are the weather is, you know, like I said at the end of World War II, wasn't it? They said, I wish we could control the weather.
Yeah. I'll tell you, this year has been the rough. We've lived here in Fredericton, New Brunswick, Canada, 73 miles east of Holton, Maine, which nobody's ever heard of, since 1980, and this is the worst winter we have had in those 34 years.
Wow.
Lots and lots of snow and cold and incredible. And last week was over a foot of snow and power failure. It was a mess. Sorry, guys. I can't control the weather.
Not yet on a personal level, no. Do you know what? It's okay. Look, we understand what happens, and it's not a problem. But you know what I was going to say. Just that's a small component of your bio. For the listeners, would you mind, if for those people who don't know who you are, would you be so kind as to tell everyone more about you, please?
All right. I grew up in New Jersey. It wasn't my fault. That's where we lived. I got bachelor's and master's degrees in physics from the University of Chicago. Carl Sagan and I were classmates for 3 years. He never bragged about me, but I will brag about him. I wish he were still around, which he isn't.
Likewise.
I was an itinerant physicist, if you will, for 14 years. I think I set a record for working on canceled government-sponsored advanced nuclear and space system development programs. Nuclear rockets, for example, fission nuclear rockets, compact reactors for space vehicle applications, just exciting, far-out programs that got canceled. And finally, I decided to control my own life, and actually I've lived in the same house for 26, something like 26 years now. But it was exciting and interesting. And I gave my first lecture about flying saucers in 1967, believe it or not. I read my first book in 1958, and never would have told you that I was going to be a full-time ufologist, if you will. It just worked out that way. As a matter of fact, crazy story, I was heading out to California in a car from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, where I worked on the nuclear rocket program. We had a great test, and I canceled the program. So I'm driving across the country to take what would be the most ideal job I could have imagined, working for McDonnell Douglas to figure out how flying saucers work. Now, what could be more challenging than that?
Mm-hmm.
I'm driving across the country, and I heard on the radio that the program that was paying the freight, the Manned Orbiting Laboratory, was canceled. And I walked in with my offer letter 2 days later, and you realize the woman says to me, we just laid off 5,000 people. I said, yeah, I heard on the radio. They kept me for 3 months, and there were some interesting things I did. But, and I had another short-term job, and I said, hey, I got a family to feed. I got work to do. Let's take my life in my own hands. So I got busy booking lectures, and here I am. I've given over 700 lectures, usually flying saucers are real, flying saucers in science, that sort of thing. Are real, flying saucers in science, that sort of thing. I've spoken in all 50 states, all 10 Canadian provinces, 18 other countries. And it's been quite a ride. I've done hundreds of radio and television programs. I'm the original civilian investigator of the Roswell incident.
Huh.
I'll be speaking there again at the annual festival in July. I've given more lectures at Mutual UFO Network annual symposia than anybody. I'll be speaking again this year at their meeting mid-July. Talking about the press and UFOs, and I will try to resist using too many four-letter words. And I'll be going, it looks like I'll be going to Greece. Last year, at the end of the year, I was in Finland. I was in Brazil. It's been exciting. And I bring to the table a peculiar background. That is, there are a couple of areas where people don't have a lot of knowledge. One of them is national security matters. I get people telling me, you can't, governments can't keep secrets. Dr. Tyson, a great astronomer on the East Coast,
familiar with
the
him.
proof that proof that the government can't keep secrets is how much we know about President Clinton's genitalia. That's what he said. Think about that for a minute. Dr. Seth Shostak of the SETI Institute has said the proof that governments can't keep secrets is what a lousy job FEMA, the Emergency Management Group, did on Katrina, the hurricane, and how badly the post office operates, neither of which have anything at all to do with the question of keeping secrets. I worked under security for 14 years. I've been to 20 archives, some of them many times, like the Truman Library, the Eisenhower Library, etc. I will absolutely guarantee you that governments can keep secrets. And I always get a laugh at my lectures when I show blacked out UFO documents or whited out UFO documents. There are lots of them around. Secrets can be kept. Another area where I bring to the table something different is this business that you can't get here from there. Violates the laws of physics. Haven't you read about Einstein, Stan, etc.? You can get here from there. I've worked on fission nuclear rockets. I've worked on fusion nuclear rockets, and they're the exciting things. We haven't done much in the way of building things because we haven't spent the money, but it turns out, and I guess most people aren't aware of this, that almost all the energy in the universe is produced by nuclear fusion. We hear about H-bombs, but I've worked on studies of using fusion for propulsion. You can kick particles out the back end of a rocket that have 10 million times as much energy per particle as they can get in the dumb old chemical rockets. 10 million times. Now, we didn't even know anything about nuclear fusion until 1938. Our first device, call it an H-bomb, was set off in 1952. Now, anybody who thinks that nobody knew about this before we did is being very, how shall I say, self-righteous and wrong. The Kepler satellite surely tells us that there are a lot of places out there where there should be beings, that is, where there are planets. And it wasn't too long ago when we thought we had the only solar system in the whole universe. And we're at the top of the heap. That's a pipe dream. And everybody else could have done their Keplers, which has picked up, it's not working now, but it found loads of planets. Everywhere you look, there are planets. And some of them are bigger, some of them are smaller than Earth, et cetera, but there's not the slightest reason at all to think we're it. And the SETI people, and I should tell you that I say that SETI, rather than standing for Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence, really stands for Silly Effort to Investigate. So Frank Drake said a few years back, there might be as many as 8,000. He's the first one to do a radio telescope search for signals from outer space. He said there might be as many as 8,000 places that could send signals to us. Now, based on Kepler, that in our own galaxy, we would expect there's probably 8 billion places. Yeah. On average, there's one planet per star, and not all of them are going to have life. Some will have several planets, some will have none. But it's a busy place out there. And one of the problems is people don't understand. Gee, sounded like we lost contact.
No, it's okay. You're back again.
Oh, okay. There are 1,000 stars within 54 light years of here.
1,000.
Wow.
And within 1,000 light years, there's about 8 million stars. So, our specialness is in our heads, if you will. We're dreaming. Everybody thinks we're the big shots. We're not.
Can I ask you?
Go on.
You're driving along, and you've just decided to question what the propulsion that could possibly be used in ET craft, in disk sources, yeah?
Well, there are two parts to the propulsion problem. One is, how do you get from one solar system another one here? And the other is, once you're in the atmosphere of the planet, how do you zip around? Now, these are two entirely different realms. Between the stars, there ain't nothing, man.
Yeah.
When you get in the atmosphere, you've got a gravitational field, you've got the air to control, which affects lift, drag, heating. And we have a direct analogy, the nuclear navy. Everybody's got, every big country has a nuclear navy. We have huge nuclear-powered aircraft carriers. As a matter of fact, they can operate for 18 years without refueling.
Wow.
Which is very impressive to me. And they carry, depending which country and so forth, about 75 little airplanes that can fly for maybe 2 hours without refueling. So I got a two-stage system, and the aircraft carrier doesn't work worth a darn in the atmosphere, and the airplanes don't work worth a darn on the ocean. So we have motherships, if you will, starships, whatever you want to call them. And we have reports of huge craft. I remember one case, 30-some witnesses and an engineer triangulated, if you will, and the object was someplace between 0.6 of a mile and 1.2 miles long. That's big, man. And, the little ones, typically, Ted Phillips in Missouri has collected more than 5,000 reports of physical trace cases where people see an object on or near the ground, and when it leaves, one finds physical changes, not crop circles. These are burn circles, burn rings, landing gear marks, whatever.
Yeah.
And those objects, this is from 80 countries, those are typically 40 to 60 feet in diameter. So, two-stage systems. And that's not surprising. You got two different environments. And the thing is that it's not as if fusion is unknown, despite our coming to the table late. But, step back a little bit. The SETI guys, they're talking about radio signals. Of course, they're using analog instruments. We're going digital, aren't we, folks? The first long-distance radio signal on the planet was received in 1901 by Marconi in Newfoundland, part of Canada here. 1901. That's the first long-distance signal. And the key, if you look at technology, in whatever direction you want to look, whether it's computers or communications equipment or whatever, progress comes from doing things differently in an unpredictable way. A laser is not just a better light bulb, entirely different physics. So the notion that aliens out there are stuck with our level of technology.
Very true.
I mean, that's an incredible notion that they haven't made any improvements. I don't use a slide rule anymore, and I hope people in the audience know what a slide rule is. Well, I was at a university in Detroit and mentioned that, and I looked around, not a bit of reaction at all. I said, well, I was using a slide rule when I started working in industry. Any of you know what a slide rule is? Not one student there knew what it was. Made me feel terribly old.
So for everyone listening, that's pre-calculator.
That's pre-calculator, yes. No batteries. Hey, that would be a new invention, a battery-powered calculator, a battery-powered slide rule.
I love the sound of that.
So what I'm trying to say is it is incredibly silly to think aliens are stuck at our level of technology. It's equally silly to think that they're sending us signals. Who are they sending them to, and what for? Especially if you can come here. Now, I've been to Australia twice, which is a long way from here, believe me. And it would have been faster and cheaper to telephone. But they wanted me there in person.
Mm-hmm.
So the fact that people can send signals doesn't mean that's the only way of contact. And the SETI people don't allow for anybody traveling here. That's against the rules. Just signal. Only signals, guys. Have they provided any evidence that there's anybody out there sending signals our way? Not a shred.
Mm-hmm.
Have we got any evidence that aliens are visiting? All over the place. All over the planet. We have radar visual sightings. You have multiple witness cases, the physical trace cases, the abduction cases. There's an enormous amount of evidence. Now, remember, I'm not saying that every time somebody sees a UFO, they're seeing an alien spacecraft. That's the wrong question.
Mm-hmm.
The question is, are any of the things people see alien spacecraft? As a nuclear guy, I'm accustomed to dealing with the oddballs, if you will. Less than 1% of uranium atoms, if you get a hunk out of the ground, are uranium-235. That's what we use in nuclear reactors. Less than 1%. But what do I care about the atoms that aren't U-235?
Mm-hmm.
The United States, during World War II, with a little help from Britain along the way, set up a facility to make U-235. It was a mile long. They were using 5% of the electrical power being produced in the United States. This is in Oak Ridge, Tennessee.
Wow.
A gaseous diffusion plant, it was called. This was done in secret, mind you, for people who say you can't keep secrets. And the reason it was in Tennessee is because they got TVA, Tennessee Valley Authority, that makes lots of electricity. But, yes, it's less than 1%. Should we say, well, it's not worthwhile, it's only 0.7%? No, that's what we want. And anybody doing medical research, most drugs don't cure any disease, they'll kill you. But you look for the ones that work. And so when it comes to UFOs, yes, most sightings can be explained. So what? It's the ones that can't be that matter, where we have clearly manufactured objects, not just lights in the sky, behaving in ways that we can't duplicate. That is the ability to hover, to move extremely rapidly, to make right-angle turns without noise, without any visible external engines, without any wings, without any tail. That's what we're looking at. And they're seen all over the planet. And let me get to the security angle again. People say, well, why don't the aliens just come here and land on the White House lawn? Pick a place, the Kremlin, someplace in London. There's no room in London to land a saucer, but you know what I mean.
You've been, clearly.
I hate to tell the audience that the word around this planet is if it moves, shoot it. Right. Intruders in airspace are not encouraged. They're discouraged. Every major nation has an air defense command. And aliens could tell that immediately, because after you try to shoot them down, they get a little concerned. It's kind of funny. I've had 7 different reports in the course of lecturing all over the world from people who quietly tell me about being at a military facility where saucers were set up to chase UFOs and never came back. Orders were issued in 1952, mind you. Shoot them down if they don't land when instructed to do so. Now, a cartoonist would have a joyful day with that one. How do you tell the aliens, hey, get on down there, we want you? If I've heard of 7 cases, there's a lot more than that. As a matter of fact, there were over 200 cases in the early 50s of military planes in the United States crashing fatally to the pilot. And the New York Times used words like disintegrated and disappeared. Kind of strange words. 5 of those pilots had over 100 missions in Korea, where there were MiGs trying to shoot them down. You got to be a pretty decent pilot to survive 100 missions where somebody's trying to kill you. But they come back to the United States where there were no MiGs and have a fatal accident. That seems a little suspicious.
Mm-hmm.
And I know Tim Good, an outstanding English researcher, has found cases on your side of the pond of go up and don't come back safely, anyway. So it's a multifaceted question, the UFO question, and people tell me also, why would they come here anyway if they don't want to be nice guys and land where we want them to land? Well, let's face it. From an alien viewpoint, we're a primitive society whose major activity is tribal warfare. World War II, and I certainly don't need to lecture you guys about what happened in World War II.
Mm-hmm.
We Earthlings, nice guys that we are, killed over 50 million people. We destroyed 1,700 cities. We are not nice guys. It's clear at the end of the war we had atomic bombs. Fortunately, only 2 have been dropped on cities, but how many people recognize that we have exploded would be a better word, 2,000 nuclear bombs on this planet. Only 2 on people so far. But there are thousands of nuclear warheads around the planet. We're not nice guys. And any smart alien knows if you've captured the thrill of the nuclear weapon, you can use it for propulsion. The Navy has nuclear submarines, navies do, and nuclear aircraft carriers. I worked on a study of fusion propulsion in 1962. That's a long time ago. Well, we haven't built one successfully as far as I know. It costs a lot of money. And there's another thing that people don't realize, how much money gets spent on advanced research and development programs. Lockheed developed a stealth aircraft, $10 billion in secret over a period of 10 years. Way back in 1958, when I was working on nuclear airplanes for General Electric, we spent that year $100 million. We employed 3,500 people, of whom 1,100 were engineers and scientists. It was not 6 professors and 20 grad students. It's a major effort. $100 million is a lot of money then. Maybe it's not such a large amount today.
But when you talk,
what I'm saying
it is a huge amount. And when you're talking about worked on, you're talking about fusion jet engines.
Fission.
Oh, sorry, fission jet engines.
The idea, the idea was very straightforward. You have a nice reactor operating at temperatures like 1,800 degrees Fahrenheit. Air comes in, gets heated in the reactor, goes out through the turbine, and you have a plane that will operate for thousands of hours without refueling. Now, we tested jet engines on nuclear power, but as far as I know, we never flew an airplane on nuclear power. There was work done on nuclear ramjets. And, it's exciting. It's a little strange because there is radiation emitted from the reactor, and if you're the pilot, you're protected by a shield, but I wouldn't come up to one from the side because you might get cooked.
Or be on the flight deck of an aircraft carrier when one takes off.
Well, yeah. We live. All I'm trying to say here is that in a very short period of time, we've managed to reach out to the stars in our own way with fission and fusion, and of course, the motivation of Earthlings We want bigger bombs. In 1944, a big bomb was a 10-ton blockbuster, released the energy of 10 tons of dynamite, TNT, if you will. Well, the first atomic bomb was about 16,000 tons of dynamite energy release. That was in 45. 52, the first H-bomb, 10 million tons of TNT energy release. And the Soviets exploded one that was 57 million tons of TNT. That's one bomb. In such a short period of time, in 8 years, we went from 10 tons to 57 million tons. Wow. Now, if you were an alien, what would you think about this place?
No, you're right. You would not come near it.
The military budget this year, the military budget on the planet this year is approximately $1 trillion. And there's a lot of starving kids on this planet, too. So what does that tell you about Earthlings? Be wary. Make sure they don't come out with their brand of friendship out here. If I were an alien, I certainly wouldn't want Earthlings out there. Not with our track record.
It seems like we have our morals all in the wrong direction.
If I may ask, we've spoken a lot about secrecy and the evidence that exists, and I agree with you 100%. It's overwhelming. In fact, Dave and I always say, even if only one sighting were in fact true, that is sufficient for the phenomenon to be true. But I'm curious, why do you think? Yeah, why do you think it is kept a secret? Is there a profit motive? Is there maybe the thought that we are maybe not mature enough as people to know about this? I mean, I feel a bit angry that people that do know this in powerful positions don't tell us. What is your take on that?
You mean why the cover-up?
Correct.
That's a legitimate question, but let's think about it for a minute. I think the first reason, I'll give you 5, 6 reasons. First, you want to figure out how the darn things work. They make wonderful weapons delivery and defense systems. Mm-hmm. We spend a lot of money trying to get better and better weapons delivery and defense systems. As I mentioned, stealth aircraft, $10 billion was spent developing that. So that's the first thing. You set up your secret project because you've got wreckage, not just from Roswell, but from the plains of San Augustine, from Aztec. Rule number 1 for security, no matter who's doing it, is you cannot tell your friends without telling your enemies. They listen to the radio, too. Mm-hmm. Read newspapers, watch television. Yeah. There's no way to say, hey, we don't want any enemies to listen to this. We're just going to tell our nice guys, our people. That's nonsense. You can't do that. Mm. The second problem is the other side of the very same coin. What if somebody over there, which can be any place not here, what if somebody figures out how these things work before we do? Mm. How do we defend against them? We don't want them to know. We know. They know. Mm-hmm. Weapon, counter-weapon, counter-weapon. We've been playing this game for a very long time. Bigger spears, stronger shields. You know, that's the way of mankind, isn't it? And so the third problem is different. What if there were an announcement made tomorrow by 2 highly trusted people, or people trusted around the world, the Queen and the Pope, kind of an odd couple, mm-hmm. but you know, that's all right. Mm-hmm. Saying that indeed Earth is being visited by intelligently controlled extraterrestrial spacecraft, and they're neutral. What would happen? Well, church attendance would go up, mental hospital admissions would go up, the stock market would go down. And I think the younger generation, which unlike me, was never alive when there wasn't a space program. People don't realize how anti-space the scientific world was, say, in the 30s. Well, your British astronomer Royal in 1956 said space travel is utter bilge. What good would it do? Who would spend the money? A year later, Sputnik went up, and we're off to the races. But he wasn't very imaginative. I think the younger generation would push for a new view of ourselves, instead of as Brits, Canadians, Americans, Greeks, Peruvians, Chinese, whatever, as Earthlings. from an alien viewpoint, we are all Earthlings. We don't seem to like that very much. If we did like it, we wouldn't be spending $1 trillion on things military each year. So I think no government, a terrible thing to say, but no government wants to give up power. And certainly there's no government that I know of on this planet, yours or mine, and I'm a dual citizen of the United States and Canada, so I'll count both of them. None of these want people to owe their primary allegiance to the planet instead of that individual government. Nationalism is still the only game in town that I can see anyway. If it weren't, why would we be spending all this money on things military?
Mm-hmm.
The fourth problem, in the United States at least, and I don't know whether the situation is similar in England, we have a guy called Pat Robertson, a fundamentalist, who insists that all the intelligent life in the universe is on planet Earth, and all this UFO stuff is the work of the devil. He also thinks that the world was created in 4004 BC. I think it was a Thursday afternoon. But
I think you're right.
I think he left out 6 zeros there, you know.
Yeah, agreed.
So there's another problem. People say to me, Stan, look, if aliens are coming here, they got more advanced technology than we have. Yeah, I'll buy that. But that means that soon maybe we'll develop new methods of energy production. There goes the oil industry. New methods of ground and air transport. Mm-hmm. There goes the car and plane industry. New methods of communications and, you know, economic chaos. Aren't you worried about that? I say no. I mean, I don't feel a lot of pity for the buggy whip manufacturers who aren't making many buggy whips anymore. Mm-hmm. The world has changed. Or the slide rule manufacturers. You know. And finally, I have, as I mentioned earlier, have had 7 reports quietly. These people were not looking for attention, of aircraft going up, chasing UFOs and never coming back. And the families weren't told. And people told me, oh, Stan, come on. Of course they told the families that their son disappeared chasing a flying saucer. No, they didn't tell them that. There were 166 American airplane crew members who were on board airplanes, mostly just after World War II, that were tickling the radar, that's their phrase, in North Korea, in China, in Russia. They'd zip in to see how quickly the radar came on. Sometimes they were closer than they should have been. A number of those planes got shot down. And the Americans returned the favor. We shot down Russian planes, too. And nobody said anything to anybody. Families were not told about that. Unfortunate accident, plane crashes at sea. Sorry about that. Until 2001, a conference was held. They brought in the families, gave them the medals their sons had earned, and told them what happened. That's 50 years of not telling people what happened to their family members. Governments do keep secrets. But if you made such big announcements, maybe there would be a lot of pilots to say, I don't want to go up and chase those guys. I think these are reasons, and, you know, you can think of others for the secrecy. It may be that they're stealing goodies from the planet. All those diamonds that go into the ocean off Africa, you know, the nodules of metals that are at the bottom of the ocean. Who knows what they're doing?
Do you think
one of my books, I've got 20 different reasons for coming to planet Earth. Radio broadcasters with a weekly show, Idiocy in the Boondocks.
do you think that some of those visitors, let's call them, are in fact, and I don't know if they are or not, but are in fact working with people that are here? Is that a possibility, do you think?
Well, I think it's a possibility. I think it's more likely. I mean, I don't talk to the squirrels in my backyard. I think they're here for their purposes. Remember, though, we might be somebody's colony.
Yep.
Australia was started by convicts who were sent over from England. Mm-hmm. I was surprised that they take great pride in that down in Australia.
No, that's true. We do.
You know, this could be a penal colony. In other words, gas food, lodging, next exit. Grad students doing their thesis work on the development of a primitive society. You got to go a long way before you not find another planet where the people don't all speak the same language, or you have many different races. Who knows?
Or they still kill each other. Yeah.
Yeah, we're not nice. And I don't say that cynically. I think if you stand back at the end of World War II, there were 3 reasons that our alien visitors would be concerned about Earthlings. Nuclear weapons, powerful rockets used for killing. The Germans weren't sending mail to England by V-2 rockets, as you may recall. They were trying to kill people.
Mm-hmm.
And powerful radar, which was the beginning of the electronics age. And you know what? There was only one place on the planet where you could study all 3 of those in July 1947. Southeastern New Mexico.
Mm-hmm.
Trinity site, where the first nuclear weapon was exploded, and I'll be leading a tour, or co-leading a tour there in April. And 6 months later, funny rules here, the Trinity site, where the first nuclear weapon was exploded in July 1945, is a National Historic Monument. That means it's got to be accessible to the public. So, 2 days a year, it's accessible. You can go there, take a little tour, and see where it was exploded. It's on the grounds of the White Sands Missile Range. That's where we were firing to capture German V-2s. And that's where we had our best radar, because sometimes the rockets went south instead of north. So we needed good radar there. And during a trip to England, I was on a television show, and an English astronomer said, well, they could have gone to the Soviet Union. No, they didn't test their first A-bomb until 1949.
Mm-hmm.
Americans was 1945. And also in southeastern New Mexico is Roswell, folks.
I was going to ask you, that's also Mac Brazel's house, right? Ranch?
Well, yeah, his ranch is in southeastern New Mexico, near the town of Corona, 75 miles north of Roswell. And, you know, the story, there's been so much misinformation. I have people asking me questions clearly indicating that they'd heard some nonsense. And, you know, let's get the story straight. I had somebody ask, well, why did Jesse Marcel, the intelligence officer at the base in Roswell, and the debunkers never tell you that that was the most elite group, the 509th, elite military group in the entire world, because they dropped the atomic bombs on Japan.
That was the Enola Gay's
in Operation Crossroads in 1946.
That's right. The Enola Gay was there too. Yep.
It wasn't a bunch of guys, troops sitting around making up stories. It was a very special place, and Major Marcel didn't call me. I happened to be in, I suppose you could say, the right place at the right time. I was at a television station in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, and I was promoting a lecture I was giving that night at Louisiana State University. I was supposed to do 3 interviews. I had done 2, and the third reporter was nowhere to be found. Didn't have cell phones around all over the place. It was 1978. And the station manager's giving me coffee. There's nobody around. He doesn't want to lose the interview, but he knew that I had other things to do because he knew the people from the university who brought me to the station. And out of the blue, he says, you know, the guy you ought to talk to is Jesse Marcel. And brilliant investigator that I am, I said, who's he? His answer changed my life. This was totally unexpected. He says, oh, he handled wreckage of one of those saucers you were interested in when he was in the military. What? Where'd that come from, you know? We're old ham radio buddies. He's a great guy. You ought to talk to him. Lives in Houma. Well, that didn't tell me anything. I didn't know where Houma was, but I made it there the next day from the airport. Incidentally, the reporter showed up, and I did the interview, and I was busy all day. It had a great response on campus that night. So the next day from the airport, I called information and got a number for Jesse A. Marcel in Houma, still not knowing where it was. I've been there since, but and talked to Jesse Marcel. Now, he couldn't deny, I found out later, he couldn't deny his involvement. His name was in newspapers all over the place, as far away as China. He couldn't say, I had nothing to do with that, when he knew there were loads of newspapers. So he told me his story. And I worked hard with somebody else, Bill Moore, and the next year and a half we found 62 people in conjunction with the Roswell incident. First book came out in 1980. Kept looking. By 1986, it was 92 people. And I instigated a television program, Unsolved Mysteries, and they ran a story that was seen by 27 million people the first time around. They did a good job. And so because I had instigated the program, I got access to those people, and pretty soon people were crawling out of the woodwork. Uncle Joe told them about it. Cousin Bill told them about it. It was a long quest. But Jesse didn't come running to me. I managed to locate the rancher's son. I managed to locate a whole bunch of people. And, it's hard work. Back then it was, I hate to say this for people, but it was before there was an internet. Finding people wasn't so easy back then. Today it's a lot easier to find people. Some of us wish it wasn't. So Roswell wasn't the only crash. And I get people making this argument. They say, Stan, look, you're coming here from another solar system. That means you got advanced technology. How could you possibly crash? Well, as I indicated earlier, the motherships don't crash. It's the little Earth excursion modules that crash. Mm-hmm. The aircraft carrier versus the airplane on the carrier, different sort of system, situation, entirely different. So I know of no mothership crash. I know of several Earth excursion module crashes. Things go wrong. You run into a hailstorm, for example. I've had my car dented all over the place in New Mexico with a hailstorm. And when you're out in the middle of nowhere, where do you go? What do you do? How do you hide? New Mexico, I have to tell you this. I had a call from a woman journalist in England. I don't understand, she said, why don't you just drive your car up to the crash site, park it along the road, and go in with a metal detector and find wreckage. I asked, have you ever been to New Mexico? Well, no. I said, well, the first problem is there's no road at the crash site. Well, of course there's a road. I said, look, New Mexico is the 5th largest state, but it has one of the lowest population densities in the whole country. There's no road, and there's no people. I had looked it up as it happened, and the population was about 1 million when you guys had about 40 million at that time. And it's 3 times the size of England and Wales combined.
Wow.
So it's an entirely different experience. And I was with a German reporter for Der Stern, I guess, or Der Stern, whatever it is. And he couldn't get over. I picked him up in Albuquerque, and we drove down to Roswell, 200 miles away. And he couldn't get over a couple of things. How far apart things were. You just drive and you drive and you're driving. There's no people. There's no cities. There's no... Roswell is 200 miles from Albuquerque. It's 200 miles from Amarillo. It's 200 miles from El Paso. He also couldn't get over the fact that the skies were so clear. Mm-hmm. We're watching the comet, a comet. He said there's no place in Europe that has skies like this. Wow. Especially near the horizon. You still see stars. Well, it's a different world. And if I had that same English astronomer says they could have gone to the Soviet Union, He said, why would anybody go to New Mexico? All there is sand. And, of course, he'd never been there either. 2 of the 3 nuclear weapons labs in the United States were in New Mexico. That's where we were testing rockets. The reason that they were there, because there aren't people there.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, you don't explode a nuclear weapon in somebody's backyard, as a general rule. So you have to understand that the place is different. And there's a book just out last year, really, the Aztec incident. Aztec is a town in northwestern New Mexico. And there was a crash there in 1948, March. And Scott Ramsey and his wife Suzanne had done an incredible amount of research. Good, solid case. Another crash, in other words. And so you need to look at things realistically. I'm not saying the saucers crash all over the place. I'm saying there have been other crashes. And I'm not saying I know why they crash and why do airplanes crash. Somebody goofed, maybe. Who knows? But the important thing is, did they or didn't they crash? And they did.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. And, and how can you keep it secret? Well, as I said, there's nobody there. Military moves in, grabs the pieces, and goes home. And very restricted access on the Roswell Army airfield. As I said, this was the atomic bombers of the world. You don't just wander around that place.
Yeah. Do you think?
Hey, let me see your crash saucer, folks. Go on.
Do you think there were any survivors of those crashes?
Interesting question. The story is that at least in Roswell and the plains of San Augustine, there may have been 1 or 2 survivors, which got picked up and taken off hither, thither, or yon. And it's not too far to Los Alamos. There were at one time 7,000 people worked at Los Alamos, all behind security, if you will. And so people, especially in Europe, have trouble realizing how many places there are in the United States where you could hide an army.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean that seriously. Where you're prohibited to fly over, you can't go in the door, security is tight. There are loads of places like that. And some of them are large. Area 51, which you've heard about, I'm sure.
Mm-hmm.
I presume everybody's heard about Area 51. I don't know whether there are any saucers there or not. And it was set up out in the middle of nowhere, not too far from Las Vegas. And that's where the U-2 aircraft was developed. That's where the SR-71 was developed. And drones and all kinds of other strange vehicles. And they were developed there because, test flown anyway, because there's nobody there. Until the age of satellites, how can anybody tell what you were doing there? And then you build an underground base. So you're safe if a nuclear weapon goes off. And people forget the Cold War. And I don't know whether people in England were worried about somebody dropping a nuclear weapon on you, but it was certainly of concern in the United States.
Mm-hmm.
Intercontinental ballistic missiles. There's a strange progression here. In 1948, General Leslie Groves, who headed the Manhattan Project to develop nuclear weapons, the project was successful. He was asked, how long do you think it'll be before the Russians have nuclear weapons? He said, well, look, we have a much more advanced technological society. We didn't get destroyed during the war, etc. It'll probably be at least 8 years. And besides, they don't have any means for delivering them. In 1949, the next year after he made this statement, the Russians tested their first Takeoff. And about means for delivering them, the United States had left the B-29, big airplane during the war, there. And the Russians copied it and made a lot more copies.
Mm-hmm.
And all of a sudden, great shock and awe, in the early 50s, the United States was suddenly vulnerable. The Russians had the atomic bomb, and they had a means for delivering them. Realized there weren't even lots of radar installations around the United States. we had the Ground Observer Corps, believe it or not. People standing at high places in the community looking to see if there were any Russian planes attacking. And they'd call somebody. That was before the radar net was built. Honest to God, that's the way it was. So, arrogance is part of the picture, too. And, you know, it's just like, I hate to say this to Englishmen, but you knew at the start of the Second World War you'd beat the Germans because you beat them before. Nothing to worry about, folks. Remember Dunkirk?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Thank God for all those fishing boats. You know, the Germans had made a lot of progress between 1920 and 1940. And since you didn't have to worry about them because we beat them once, the Brits hadn't caught up. The Germans built the first airplanes with jet engines. It was a British inventor who developed the jet engine, but who needs it? Well, it turns out they didn't.
Do you know,
the German tanks had more armor.
They were. I have to say that the German weapons were certainly made with brute force in mind. Very superior, you know, armaments, shielding, and you know, the bore or the size of the safe with the tank. The Tiger was just unbelievable. But I was going to say, the German tank was just unstoppable. But we've only got a few minutes before the top of the hour. We're going to go to a short break, and then we'll come back again. But I was going to, just in that, maybe, I don't know if there is such a thing as a short answer for this, but if we're looking at that we're currently being visited, which everyone listening to us will certainly be on this side, how long do you think that visitation goes back? Do you think they pricked up their ears when we started letting nukes off, or have they been here for some time?
Well, I think they have visited there have been visits for thousands of years. There's a fine book by Dr. Barry Downing called Flying Saucers and the Bible, and he goes to the Old and New Testaments and finds lots of stories. Now, they didn't call them flying saucers. Who used saucers back then? You know, they don't look like cups, really. So, but the stories, clearly, the pillar of fire by night, you know, the cloud by day. There are stories in literature of many countries. I think they've been coming in here for a long time. And that's why I mentioned things like penal colony. They may be dumping off, or the people they wanted to leave, or they may be mining our resources. You know, just a quick example, uranium 100 years ago, its primary use was as yellow glaze for tableware, pottery. It's not used for that anymore because it's illegal. We didn't know how important it was. The Navy uses zirconium. Who else uses zirconium? You know, all kinds of goodies here, in other words. So we don't know the history of this whole business. But I would expect the Galactic Federation, if there is such a thing, to keep tabs on where the idiots are. Somebody new getting able to bother us ought to be of concern. The United States learned Pearl Harbor happened. Whoops. We weren't paying enough attention. Where were you folks?
That's so true. You know, we're considered the kids with the matches in our respect. So hang on, everyone. We'll be back. Here's the break music. We'll be back in just a few minutes' time.
Radio at freedomslips.com. We'll be right back after this message.
this is Thomas, a.k.a. a Mad Painter. I'd like you to join me Monday nights, 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time for Open Canvas. Don't forget to bring an open mind.
Yes, folks, that's right. Bring an open mind to an open canvas. Again, that is Monday nights, 10 p.m. Eastern. UFOs to government corruption. This is Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com. You don't need to expect us. We're already here.
There is no denying the world is awakening. We see it in the global uprisings and demonstrations of the people around the planet and the new way of thinking and living that is arising naturally within each one of us and our communities. I have been a major player in this global shift and movement for over 20 years and have helped tens of thousands of people around the world change their lives and find their voice in order to help create the paradigm change we so desperately need. Join me here at Revolution Radio on the Just Bernard Show every Tuesday at noon Eastern Time for 2 hours of powerful interviews and discussions with some of the most influential visionaries of consciousness, alternative media, and suppressed knowledge. We promise to reveal the real matrix and empower your human experience.
Your data safe. You have the necessary information to assist you in confidently living through just about any survival situation. Your survival from gardening, off-grid living, medical knowledge, or even natural or man-made EMPs on your list of personal concerns. You have your documents and your personal information in a safe place in your hands where you know where it is. Well, check out our preloaded EMP-proof thumb drive. Over 3 gigs of survival documents and how-tos, plus the USDA offline food preservation website, and much, much more, including a surprise bonus we just can't tell you about it. With plenty of room left over to store your most important documents. Imagine if a megavirus or computer failure took out your bank, or all the banks for that matter. Are your banking records safe in your hands? So when they get things fixed and repaired, you can say, hey, look, this is what I had. You have it. I want it back. Is your personal data safe? Family records, addresses, phone numbers? Well, squeeze on over to freedomslips.com. Yes, that's www.freedomslips.com. Click the banner on the homepage for the EMP-proof bullet drive to get the full scoop of everything that we offer. So, folks, keep your data safe for your peace of mind. Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com. You don't need to expect us. We're already here. Thank you for tuning in to Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com. If you plan to call in and speak with one of our hosts, please turn down your radio and separate yourself from any background noise and wait for the area code to be called on before you speak. And don't forget, Revolution Radio freedomslips.com is listener supported. So stop by the homepage, freedomslips.com, visit the site support area to help support the host you're listening to's airtime. Thank you. Revolution Radio freedomslips.com, where the truth never sleeps. Revolution Radio. You're listening to Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, 100% listener-supported radio, and now we return you to your host.
You're back with Dave and Mackie's Shiny Side Out on freedomslips.com. That's right, the #1 listener-supported talk radio on the net. Now, guys, since it is listener-funded radio, and you like what you hear, especially today, please go to freedomslips.com and push the donate button. It's on the site support page, on the left hand in the chat, in fact. Your donation is greatly appreciated, and it really does help run this station. Now, I'd like to say hello to all of the new listeners that we have today. I'm sure there are some. We're glad you're on board. And we're halfway through show number 104, 4 and 100, and we're talking to a very special guest indeed, Mr. Stanton Friedman. Like I said, the Dogen of UFO research as far as I'm concerned. And so far it has been mind-blowing, fascinating. And thank you very much, Stanton, for being on with us.
My pleasure. My pleasure.
Sir, we have a question from the chat room. Now, I don't know the background around this, but we do take them sometimes. So the question is, did you ever work on the NERVA rocket? That's NERVA. Apparently, this person's dad worked on it in Pittsburgh in the 1960s, and his name was Herbert Kirschbaum. Thank you.
I certainly did work on the program. That's Nuclear Energy for Rocket Vehicle Applications, NERVA. And there were 3 different outfits that were working on nuclear rockets. The idea is very simple. You take very cold liquid hydrogen, you pump it through a nuclear reactor, and it comes out at 4,000 degrees. And we tested the NRX A6. Power level was 1,100 megawatts. That's half the power of the huge Grand Coulee Dam. Los Alamos tested the Phoebus nuclear rocket engine, and its power level was 4,400 megawatts, twice the power of the huge Grand Coulee Dam. Wow. Exhaust temperature was over 4,000 degrees. But the program was canceled. The operation was a success, but the program died, if you will. And, I don't recognize that name, but that was in, I worked there between 66 and 69 in Pittsburgh. And it was very exciting. The tests were run out at the nuclear test site, which is near Las Vegas and not too far from Area 51.
Right.
And I'll tell you, in my whole industrial career, most exciting moments were when they were running the tests. Nobody knew how long the reactor would last before the fuel elements came apart. I mean, it's out in the middle of nowhere. And they would announce the temperatures and pressures. So after 5 minutes, the temperatures and pressures were nominal, and 10 minutes, and the limit was an hour because you needed liquid hydrogen enough to cool down the reactor, because once the reactor becomes very radioactive, it's giving off a lot of heat. And it went to 30 minutes, 40 minutes, it went to full 60 minutes. And I had some experiments on that. And I had also done some work just a few weeks before. They wanted some information about the nuclear heating rates in the control vanes, which are outside the reactor, alongside it. And so I'd run some tests, experiments, made some measurements, gave them the information they wanted. And I was concerned, geez, I hope I did that experiment right, and we don't melt the control vanes, because then we got real problems. So the NERVA program was exciting and interesting, but what was missing was government leadership. The nuclear submarine, Admiral Rickover, provided leadership. This is where we're going. You don't want to go there, get off the train. But NERVA, and there were several other programs. Aerojet General built a reactor too, and Los Alamos. And there was nobody who said, hey, we want to use this. It would double the weight you could put into orbit if you use a nuclear upper stage. This is real. This is not science fiction. And so, yes, I did work in Pittsburgh. Well, the facility was in the small town of Large, just outside of Pittsburgh. But, yeah, it was exciting times.
I'm going to ask a question in relation to that. When you said that it doubled the takeoff weight, but wouldn't it, quadruple the thrust output and make it usable in space? What was the comment about whether, the history of our understanding of how space worked, that thrust jets wouldn't work? Is that right?
Well, the NERVA would work in outer space. There's no question about it. It's a question of not having the will to build it, to use it. What can I say? The worst meeting I ever attended in my life. I was working on the NERVA program, and I was out at Aerojet General, which was also building a similar system. And my counterpart, radiation shielding for nuclear reactors, asked if I wanted to attend a meeting. The NASA Space Nuclear Propulsion Office was having a meeting, and the topic of the meeting was, what are we going to do with the nuclear rocket engine? Worst meeting I ever attended in my life. Because here these guys didn't have the faintest idea of what they wanted to do. Well, we could use it to set a base on the moon, we could go to Mars, Earth orbit, lunar orbit, and when you don't know what you want to do with a system, the money goes elsewhere pretty quick. And it was a very sad thing, a lack of leadership. Everybody I worked with thought we'd have a base on the moon by 2000, certainly. And it didn't happen because there was a lack of will. I worked on at least 5 programs that needed somebody who said, this is where we're going, folks. Let's get with it. And there wasn't anybody to say that.
See, this is very interesting. This is something we want to touch with with you as well. The question that has been on our mind is, why did the space program, specifically the Russian and the American space programs, come to such an unceremonious end? I mean, it seems like someone just let the air out of the space program in the 70s, and there was no more will to do anything further, not to go to the moon, not to the Mars. Why do you think that?
It was competition for money. Now, admittedly, some people have suggested the aliens told us, stay the heck off our moon, folks. Who knows? But national leadership isn't always there. I say that as a citizen of 2 countries. And, who knows what goes on in the inner halls. There's always somebody who wants to spend your money for you in other ways. And if they talk faster and better, then they get the dough. And without the dough, you don't go.
That's true.
Is the word dough used to mean money in England? I don't know.
It sure is, sir.
It is. So that's a great mystery, and I'm a great admirer of Admiral Rickover, who put the nuclear navy business, because first nuclear submarine was operating in 1956, and in the aircraft carriers. And people are shocked when I say an nuclear-powered aircraft carrier can operate for 18 years without refueling. That's incredibly impressive to me. Because it changes all your naval tactics if the carrier can steam at full power for days, months, years. If you got to stop for gas, boy, that changes everything.
It certainly changed everything for the Bismarck. I was going to say, because it ran out of fuel, didn't refuel, and was hit in one of its fuel cells, and then hemorrhaged fuel and was taken out. There's also speculation on, I heard what you said about, possibly, we were scared away from the moon. Do you think, with all of the budgets and all the money, and this is, I'm really asking you to speculate, because I wouldn't imagine that you worked on them, but that we did go to Mars, like with manned missions?
Say that again?
Do you think that...
I couldn't understand what you said.
I'm sorry. Do you think that in some capacity, and I'm asking you to speculate, really, that we did go to Mars, and that the moon, like you said, the moon we were warned away, possibly warned away? I mean, it's all speculative.
Well, people have suggested that we've sent people to Mars and back. I don't think we have. I think if we wanted to, we know how to do it. And you see, people forget there's a very important element in what you can accomplish: money. That's why I mentioned the $100 million we spent in 1 year on the nuclear airplane program back in 1958. These things don't come cheap. Advanced technological development programs. People think that research goes on in academia. A few professors, a bunch of grad students, and that's where the action is. I've had 2 different people tell me, Stan, look, if Roswell happened, they would have had to pull half the physicists out of the colleges in the country. And I just laugh and say, that's ridiculous. We had many facilities, Los Alamos, Sandy, Oak Ridge, Hanford, I mentioned those, where we had loads of people with appropriate security clearances and big budgets. The 3 nuclear weapons labs, I checked on this several years ago, their total budget that year was greater than all the National Science Foundation study programs budget. So money is the factor. and he talks the smoothest, I guess, gets the funding. I don't know, but I'm not saying that's good or bad. I'm just saying that money is what makes the difference on these programs.
Well,
and I think I'd rather feed a few more starving kids, frankly.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, why would we want to go out there? I don't think the aliens would want us out there. Primitive society, major activity, tribal warfare.
Certainly the Galactic Federation, like you said, that we believe in it is, well, it would be natural that there would be one, would also, have restrictions based on, joining it. You'd have to be this, that, and whatever. You have to qualify, I think, and maybe being peaceful is one of your qualifications. Maybe having, I don't know, like plasma drive or something, some other interstellar thing
I'm not
automatically
saying,
qualifies you for
I talk about fusion only because it is the major source of energy production in the universe, and everybody would learn that.
Yep.
That's what makes the energy in the stars. There were very smart people who thought that stars operated by burning gas. I'm sorry, fusion is a much, 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 much more efficient program. And the nice thing about fusion, incidentally, as opposed to fission, is that you use isotopes of hydrogen as opposed to uranium. Mm-hmm. The hydrogen isotopes are the lightest elements and the most abundant elements in the universe. So wherever you go, you're going to find hydrogen.
Yeah,
you're not going to find uranium everywhere.
It makes sense. Do you know what? Are you surprised? I'm just going to take you back to Mars for one sec, yeah? You've heard in the media that they're wanting to send people to live in a one-way trip to Mars from different.
I'm not surprised that that's been suggested. Adventurers have always been around, and there'll be volunteers.
Mm-hmm.
They line up outside the door. I think, but I think we ought to wait and develop a better system. And like I say, we got problems down here that need to be handled.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the benefit of the planet that matters here. And, people tend to forget something else. Who speaks for planet Earth? Oh, we'll hold an election, I heard somebody say to me. I said, oh, really? Let's see, that there are 1.3 billion Chinese on the planet. There's 1 billion people from India. Canada has 38 million people. The United States has 310 million people. We're not going to hold an election. The United States isn't going to say, oh, yeah, well, we'll see who should speak for the planet. Not going to be an American.
Mm-hmm.
If you put it that way. The sense of perspective is missing. And, it would be nice if religious leaders could get together. And I have to give the Pope credit, the former Pope, a few years back. He said there's no reason that we can't think of God having made our brethren in outer space as well as us. And my first thought was, who's he been talking to? So we have trouble agreeing on anything on this planet, country to country. That's a sad commentary. That's why I say a primitive society whose major activity is tribal warfare. I mean, how can we dare to spend $1 trillion this year on things military? There's just an article in Physics Today about the cost in the United States of maintaining our nuclear arsenal. We're talking about tens of billions of dollars a year. Is that how we should be spending our money? I don't think so, but I don't control that budget.
I'm with you on the. It seems premature to send people to Mars, and yes, we have a lot of things we could fix on Earth. Some of those things are to do with the, some solutions that have been put forward are, New World Order or New World Government. Unifying everyone under one government, I suppose, so that become patriotic towards the planet. We know Reagan spoke about, having a common enemy would unilaterally join us all together. What are your thoughts?
Well, The United Nations doesn't accept membership from cities. I can't imagine the Galactic Federation accepting membership from countries as opposed to a planet. No matter how you slice it, we're all Earthlings. We don't pay a lot of attention to that, of course, but someday that's going to be the way it is. I hope my great-grandson grows up in a world in which being an Earthling is important.
I was going to early on. You said that you went to university with Carl Sagan, and I wanted to, from my perspective, both of you went in different directions. I was a big fan of the Cosmos show, and it really opened my eyes to the world, to the universe and everything that's out there. But coming from a fellow who was so wrapped, I suppose, in his job, and incapable of suggesting that there was life outside of the Earth or nothing that he could tell, but still to put the plaque on the Voyager and let it go. I think there's an imbalance there. Was that letting everyone know that really that's what his interest was, and that he got a hand in doing that?
Who?
Carl Sagan.
Oh, Carl, yes. Well, the Cosmos is going to be reissued in April, I guess. And Dr. Tyson, Neil deGrasse Tyson, that I mentioned earlier, is going to be, in effect, taking Carl's role. And I've written 2 articles. I do a monthly column for the MUFON journal, Mutual UFO Network. And I've done 2 about Dr. Tyson because he's said some very strange things. One was that secrecy bit, what we know about President Clinton's genitalia. He also, on a television special, claimed that our fastest craft would take 70,000 years to get to the nearest star, and scientists don't want to wait that long to get their data back. He didn't bother to mention that, oh, by the way, there's no propulsion system on that rocket. It would be like saying that if you throw a bottle in the ocean, that tells you how long it takes to cross the ocean, or put a balloon in the air, how long it to go around the planet. The astronomical community is woefully ignorant about flying saucers and deep space travel and reasons, if you will, for aliens to come here. And the evidence. You never find these guys talking about, say, for example, 5 large-scale scientific studies that I talk about. There is no evidence. You're British Astronomer Royal, and they have a long track history of saying dumb things on occasion. Lord Rees has said, only kooks see UFOs. He said that in 2012, I guess. No basis given for that. No basis at all. And it's totally untrue. Loads of astronomers see UFOs too. Maybe that proves it. Well, anyway, I don't want to look at it that way.
That's what I was going to ask you next. There's been a few books out by astronomers, haven't there?
Say that again?
There has been a few books put out by astronomers in the earlier days about UFOs. Only very few.
Well, yeah, and almost all their comments are negative. But what you look for, and Carl and I, as I said, were classmates. To give you an example of the problem, he has said there are interesting UFO sightings that aren't reliable. There are reliable UFO sightings that aren't interesting. But there are no interesting and reliable sightings. What a profound thought. Not supported by the slightest bit of evidence and totally contradicted by the readily available data. Biggest study ever done for the United States Air Force, Project Blue Book, Special Report 14. They looked at 3,201 sightings. That's a lot. They found the higher the reliability, the more likely to be unexplainable. Just the opposite of what Carl said. The astronomers don't want to look at the data. Example, in that same study, the Secretary of the Air Force, this is in 1955, big study. The press release didn't say who did the work, didn't say where it was done, and didn't give any of the data from the more than 200 charts, tables, graphs, and maps that are in the study. But Secretary of the Air Force Donald Quarles said, on the basis of this study, we believe that no objects such as those properly described as flying saucers have overflown the United States. Even the unknown 3% could have been identified as conventional phenomena or illusions if more complete observational data had been available. That's a total lie, flat-out lie. The unknowns weren't 3%, they were 21.5%. And there was a separate category, insufficient information. They also did a cross-comparison between the unknowns, the only ones we're interested in, and the knowns. The probability that the unknowns were just misknowns was less than 1%. Not one newspaper forced these guys to tell the truth. And the press release didn't even give the title of the report, Bloomberg Special Report number 14. Surely some newsman would have said, hey, what do you mean 14? What happened to 1 through 13? Oh, they were all classified. The true answer, but that wasn't given. So what I'm saying, there is this long history. I just did a book, Alien Universe. I did a book review, a column that I did, about an outstanding physicist who works at Fermilab, who's worked on the Higgs boson and stuff. And he doesn't reference any of the large-scale scientific studies and says some dumb things about flying saucers. Why do astronomers think it's okay to tell us things that aren't supported by evidence when there is evidence out there? It infuriates me. We look up to these guys. We should look down at these guys, to tell you the truth.
You're 100% correct, and Dave and I have had our fair share of, I guess, rage, you would call it, against debunkers. I mean, I have no problem with skeptics. I really don't. If you're a true skeptic, you should...
No, I don't either. I'm a skeptic.
That's it. But if somebody just throws mud, then, then that's not really helpful to anyone. In fact, you came up with 4 rules, I believe, the 4 rules of debunking. If you want to share them with us?
Yes. Sure. 4 rules for debunkers. And this covers not just flying saucers, it covers all kinds of other things. I talk about some of these things in my book, Science Was Wrong, where smart people have said stupid things. But the 4 rules are, what the public doesn't know, I'm not going to tell them. The second one is, don't bother me with the facts, my mind's made up. Third, if you can't attack the data, attack the people. It's easier and nobody will know the difference. And the fourth is, do your research by proclamation. Invest in much trouble. And you can get rid of any crazy idea,
Stanton, this is it's gold. You're right, of course. You're 100% correct. We've seen it time and again. You're right. It is not just UFO research. It's any research into paranormal or fringe science subjects where this is exactly deployed. It's an astonishing thing. But don't you find, harking back to your 4 rules there, that people will argue with you without having actually informed themselves, without having read the studies, without being familiar with the data, and they still will argue against you, correct?
Well, yeah, I mean, this happens all the time, although I must say, look, in over 700 lectures, I've had 11 hecklers, and 2 of them were drunk. And I'm told you'll get that many if you talk about sports, religion, or politics. I don't talk about those things, but and that's why I mentioned Science Was Wrong, because 14 chapters, each one based on something stupid said by some smart guy who refuses to look at the evidence, and that gets in the way. That's not science. I grew up in a different world. I thought science and journalism were both concerned with getting the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth, just like the courts, supposedly. But I found that isn't the case, unfortunately. And I'm working on a paper right now for the next Mutual UFO Network Symposium in July in Cherry Hill, New Jersey, about the media and UFOs, with a number of examples of really rotten coverage. I mean, the New York Times, all the news that's fit to print, it says here. Well, I'm not saying it's true. I'm saying that's what it says.
Sure.
Anyway, as a splendid example, they bought the idea that the explanation for Roswell was crash test dummies that were dropped all over New Mexico. And there were dummies dropped all over New Mexico. I mean, airplanes were flying higher, and you wanted to know if you had to abort flight when you're at 40,000 feet, what's the best way to do that? And you don't put pilots in to find out. You send up dummies. Now, there are two problems with that explanation. It made the front page of the Sunday New York Times above the fold. There is no better place in the United States for a news article. That's the most coverage you can get. Now, the only trouble is, I talked to the man who was in charge of the program, Colonel Madsen. His picture was in the Air Force report. The Roswell report, case closed. And none of those dummies were dropped until 6 years after Roswell. Time travel for crash test dummies. Also, the dummies, for the test to be meaningful, and there's a picture in the report, the dummies were 6 feet tall, 175 pounds. And they were in flight uniforms. And that wasn't for show, because when a body is, falling from 40,000 feet, the heating, the drag, all that is dependent on the clothing you're wearing. That's an important part of the consideration.
The drag coefficient.
Yeah, very important. And one of the problems you have, incidentally, is how long should you fall before you open your parachute? Because if you open it too soon, you might freeze to death before you get down. Minor detail kind of thing. So that was the New York Times. Now, I found Colonel Madsen. He wasn't hard to find. And I spoke with him. Firsthand, we got lunch together in Albuquerque. So it wasn't as if it was difficult to find him. And so the press coverage, when they buy into government stories, another strange example, many Americans don't realize, I don't know if the English do, but there was an Office of Censorship set up in the United States with less than 2 weeks after Pearl Harbor. And to control the flow of information, loose lips sink ships, all that sort of stuff. And one wonders if it was ever closed down, because there are other examples. Well, the example, the New York Times didn't cover the story that other newspapers did about shoot them down if they don't land when instructed to do so. Several newspapers carried that. But that story wasn't in the New York Times for some reason. And President Kennedy afterwards said that he wished the Times had run with the story about the Bay of Pigs, because then he wouldn't have attacked and they wouldn't have made such a mess of things. The New York Times knew about it, but they didn't run it. So what I'm saying, I have, like I said, given over 700 lectures all over the place. I have personally had a good press. This is not a vendetta. Nice stories about me, not 100% accurate, but certainly good enough. But why won't they cover this story? Has somebody said you better not? I don't know. But I'm convinced that if any major news organization spent the same kind of money that the Washington Post did on the blowing the lid off Watergate, Woodward, Bernstein and all that. And it did take money. Let's face it. If anybody would do that about flying saucers, they could do it in less than 6 months. For example, one of the missing links, General Carol Bolinder was an Air Force general who was asked in 1969 to see what should the U.S. government do about Project Blue Book, which was ostensibly the only group concerned with investigating UFO reports. Bolinder had nothing previous to do with it. He worked on the lunar excursion module, a good engineer. And it was dumped in his lap. And he wrote a memo, which we didn't see until 10 years later, in which he said, quote, moreover, reports of UFOs which could affect national security are made in accordance with JNAP, Joint Army Navy Air Force Publication 146, or Air Force Manual 55-11, and are not part of the Blue Book system. That's an astonishing statement. Since the Air Force had been saying the Blue Book is it, that's the only group that's concerned with UFOs. 2 paragraphs later, he says, if we close Project Blue Book, there won't be any place for the public to report UFOs. However, as previously noted, reports of UFOs which could affect national security will continue to be investigated using the procedures designed for that purpose. The Air Force says, we ain't got nothing to do with UFOs, folks, once the program was canceled as a result of this memo. A total lie. Now, I located General Bolinder. He's dead now, but he was not dead when I spoke with him. Explained that I'd had a clearance for 14 years. I'd read his memo with great interest, and it sounded to me like he was saying there are 2 separate communication channels. One for run-of-the-mill UFO sightings, and the other about ones that could affect national security. The example I used was that suppose a saucer goes down the runway and a strategic air command base where nuclear weapons are stored. That's a national security problem because there's not supposed to be anybody there. And he agreed. And yet no major media group has mentioned the Bolinder memo. There's no question about it's genuine. It came under freedom of information with a whole bunch of other things. That alone would say they've been lying through their teeth, folks. And so, how much effort would it take? Now, I realize newspapers are struggling. I don't know about in England, but they are in the United States and in Canada. The internet competition, all this sort of stuff. But can you think of a bigger story? Government lies about flying saucers? That would get some people excited, I should think.
It sure would. Like if it's not bad enough that the military lie to us, the large papers, which I think from what I understand is only 8 owners of all of the media in the world, aren't telling us or don't want us to know, or there's some, we don't know what the motive is. But, it's not only Roswell, but also the Battle of Los Angeles. What do you know about that one?
Well, that was in 1942. And there was great concern about the Japanese attacking. I mean, after all, Japan is on the other side of the Pacific Ocean. And a lot of Americans hate to admit it, but we were getting our tail kicked at the beginning of World War II from the States. And so there was great sensitivity. There were guns along the coast. Something was spotted up in the sky. They fired off a load of rounds, shells, trying to knock down whatever it was, and it stayed there. It was caught in searchlights. I remember growing up that during the war that there were searchlights looking up at the sky, looking for airplanes or whatever they were looking for. But anyway, and there was a bit of an investigation. Some of the shells hurt things on the ground. Did they, as far as we know, they didn't shoot down a flying saucer. But something was up there that didn't belong there, and that wasn't hit by the guns. And I think there's a whole book out about the Battle of Los Angeles. And I don't know that we've gotten to the truth about that yet. I mean, people think governments can't keep secrets. So I've been to 20 archives, some of them many times. There's loads of old stuff that's still classified that you don't get access to. That's the way it is. They'll give you a finder's aid, and you tell us what boxes you want, and they bring you the boxes, and then you go to the folder you want, and in it there's a withdrawal sheet. A memo, Joe Jones, Tom Smith, 2 pages, top secret, July 13th, 1949, whatever. And you can ask for it, and sometimes you'll get it. And sometimes you'll get back saying it's still classified. And sometimes it takes 6 years to get a response. There's loads of classified material out there. It is not automatically declassified. So where the files are, remember this was paper back then. It wasn't on computer disk. And who knows what's out there. Not many people looking.
So speaking about this, and again, a very interesting topic you're raising, the secrecy, I guess the information control is what we're talking about here. Do you think there is much to the consistent reporting of Men in Black? You know, it's a popular phenomenon now in the movies. I think it's not at all how it is in the movies. But do you think there's an organization within the government, or several organizations for that matter, maybe even extra government organizations, that are in fact out there simply to control the information about this kind of phenomenon?
Well, look, I've done a whole book, Top Secret Magic, MAJIC, about the Operation Majestic 12. Very controversial, and I'm certainly not saying all the MJ-12 documents are legitimate. I'm saying 4 of them are. And I've shown that a bunch of others are fraudulent. You'd expect the government, if you have good stuff out, dump garbage on the market, and it'll rub off, so to speak. So, yes. And look, I had my own Men in Black experience.
Okay.
At a conference. Well, let me tell you, I was at a conference in Oklahoma, and it was a few days, 2 or 3 days, and I got a call where I was staying. Somebody, he and his friends wanted to take me to lunch the next day. Okay, I told them where I was, and at the appointed hour, they drive up in a big black Cadillac. 3 guys in dark suits, literally. And we go out to lunch. We have a very nice lunch. They drop me off back, and I jokingly told that to a tabloid newspaper. And next thing you see in the Friedman has Men in Black experience. There was nothing. It turns out these guys, this is the Bible Belt down there, and they always wear black suits and drive black Cadillacs.
Well,
but I really think there is an Operation Majestic 12, and I know that there are people who disagree with me. But what bothers me about their disagreement is they don't follow up with research. As a specific example, one of the people on the list of 12 members was a total shocker, Dr. Donald Menzel, a Harvard University professor of astronomy, who had written 3 anti-UFO books. Now, we didn't get these documents until the 80s, and all the members of the group were dead. And I didn't like Menzel when he was alive. He had stupid explanations. He was a nasty, noisy, negativist, etc. Anyway, I found one document that linked him with other members, a loyalty hearing. He was going to lose his security clearance. And the Times and the Washington Post didn't have anything about this. So I checked. The document mentioned the name of a legal firm in Boston, thanking one of the other members for their support for Dr. Menzel. So I called the legal firm, and oh yeah, there's about 1,300 pages over at the Harvard archives in the Menzel papers. Oh, and I checked, and I had to get permission from 3 different people to look at Dr. Menzel's papers. And I got a little research grant from the Fund for UFO Research, trotted off to Boston, Cambridge actually, started looking at his papers, and was totally shocked because he did more classified work than you can imagine. He told Jack Kennedy, Kennedy had been on the board of overseers at Harvard, and his area of interest was astronomy, so Menzel and he got to know each other. He wrote to Jack in first person, Jack, saying that there was one area where he might be of assistance to him. It's just after he got elected in 1960, about the huge National Security Agency. I've had a longer continuous association with them of anybody in the country, more than 30 years as it happens. When we are properly cleared to each other, I can tell you more. And that was a total shock. And in addition, I found I had gained access to his unpublished autobiography. I had to get his wife's permission to look at that. In it, it turns out he was a cryptographer, a world-class one. He taught cryptography. He did classified work for the CIA, for the FBI, for a whole bunch of companies. None of this classified work post-World War II is mentioned in 2 special issues of Sky and Telescope magazine. One came at the time of his death, and another at the 100th anniversary of his birth. Not a word. They mentioned he was a Navy commander during World War II. But it turns out, world-class cryptographer.
Wow.
And probably got asked to look at the symbols on the Roswell wreckage and so forth and so on. Anyway, I published an article, The Double Life of Dr. Menzel, citing from the documents that I had obtained at Harvard. And I had people saying, oh, he couldn't have lived the double life. And do I need to tell anybody in England that there are people who lead double lives? Do the names Burgess, Philby, and McLean mean anything?
Actually, they do, yes.
Here are 3 guys, a lot of Americans don't know who they are, who were Russian spies working for British intelligence. You got to be careful. You got to live your life being very careful what you do and what you say, so nobody realizes that you got 2 masters. All spies, it's the same way. Those scientists at Los Alamos working on the atomic bomb, Klaus Fuchs, for example. Lead a double life. Nobody knew he was spying at the time, anyway. So I'm disappointed that I've yet to find anybody who attacked me about that, who went to Harvard and looked at the darn documents. Prove me wrong, guys. And that bothers me. If you're going to express an opinion, well, look, Philip Klass, who was the nastiest, noisiest, negativist of them all, challenged me on one of those MJ-12 documents. The typeface was wrong. You said this is genuine. It's done in the large pica type. But I've got documents here from the National Security Council done in the small elite type. And I challenge you to find any genuine documents, he had a list of criteria, done in the same size and style type. And I'll pay you $100 each up to a maximum of 10. And he gave me 60 days while I was going to the Eisenhower Library. Anyway, within a couple of weeks. So I went there and pulled out 14, copied them, and sent them a invoice for $1,000. 10 documents. I wish he hadn't limited it to 10, but anyway, I sent him the invoice and the documents, and he paid me $1,000. Told everybody about challenging me and nobody about paying me. And the crazy thing is, the Eisenhower Library has 250,000 pages of National Security Council materials. The notion that he had 9, incidentally, which he had obtained by mail, and I've double-checked, he never visited the Eisenhower Library. I've spent weeks there. What kind of reasoning is it that says if I got 9 done in the small elite type, all 250,000 must have been done it, right? That makes no sense at all. So that's the kind of, I try to cover all these arguments in Top Secret Magic. Incidentally, my website, I should mention that for people
yes, please
who look at these things. www.stantonfriedman.com. Very easy. Lists my books and DVDs and, how to reach me and all that stuff. I don't give out my number on the phone because then people try to call and then it fouls things up, The phone's busy. But what I'm getting at here is, where are the people, if you're going to express an opinion about something, who don't have facts in hand before putting mouth in gear? And I'm sure it's the same problem over there. Rendlesham Forest has had some people say very stupid things. I mean, the explanation of the lighthouse.
Oh, ridiculous, huh?
Yeah, it truly is. I mean, the lighthouse was always there, and it was always working, and if you're stationed there for months, it's not as if it's a surprise that there's a light from the lighthouse.
Oh, but also for the lighthouse to land in the forest and a guy to touch it and copy down the symbols from it.
That's a really neat trick. I agree. I mean, gee whiz.
They must have some lighthouses there. We have about 7 minutes left, and what I wanted to take us into the future now, sort of to the current. The citizens' hearing. Now, I know that you did a couple of lectures there as well. The impact that this should be having on our on humanity. Tell me what your take is.
I was there, spent a whole week there, and I didn't get paid $25,000 as the panelists got paid.
Oh.
Former congressman, you know. But it was interesting, and there's a movie that's due out anytime soon, tidbits from the hearings and stuff. I went there out of self-defense. I knew I was going to be asked all over the place what things were like, and if I wasn't there and they invited me, so what the heck, let's go and see. Mm-hmm. On the other hand, I must say, and this will surprise some people, I am not in favor of everything being released by the government. There is a national security aspect.
True.
And people don't seem to appreciate the fact that if the United States, for example, is going to put data that they've obtained from analysis of Roswell wreckage, let's say, why should they put it out if the Russians and Chinese don't put out what they have learned? I mean, you don't give potential enemies information that they can use with what they have to give you a hard time. Does that make any sense?
Mm-hmm. Totally.
So I would love to see a release, the Queen and the Pope saying that indeed Earth is being visited, and there are going to be conferences, international conferences dealing with the religious, psychological, economic aspects of this, the implications. You need a plan. It isn't enough to say, okay, aliens are visiting, pass the butter, Marge. It changes everything. And couple this with the Kepler data. It's time for us to reevaluate where we fit in the larger scheme of things, tough as that is on our egos. So I think if it energizes some media people, especially newspapers, I'd be very pleased. But I don't expect that people are going to release everything just because of that, and I really don't think they should. There are implications. It's important to the people on the planet that we go about this in a rational fashion. And let's face it, religion will be impacted. And that's why I was glad to hear the Pope say what he said. And there are religions on this planet, Mormons, the Hindus, others, who say there is life all over the place out there. It's part of their heritage, so to speak.
That's right.
And so it's a time for change. And let's face it, if we could get through atomic bombs, what could be more scary than the notion that we've developed a bomb that is the equivalent of how many thousand 10-ton blockbusters? That's scary. I mean, I would have been scared if I was living in England and they were dropping these little small 10-tonners on you guys. If we could get through that, and airplanes that could go faster than the speed of sound, and I'm appalled by the notion, I think about it sometimes, that there were times during World War II when there were hundreds of bombers flying over Europe dropping bombs on cities.
Yep.
How horrible that must have been. Dresden, for example.
Cool. You said
Curtis LeMay wanted to firebomb the heck out of Tokyo. I mean, when I say a primitive society whose major activity is tribal warfare, I'm not kidding. I think that's an honest appraisal of how we behave. And so I don't think we need to do anything that's going to stir up the rat's nest, so to speak, that comes out of, hey, this is mine. No, this is mine. We ought to have control. It needs to be thought out. And the hearings didn't provide any mechanism for doing that. So they were short on that score. On the other hand, there was plenty of good testimony given, not just mine. It's not an ego thing. There were good things to listen to. There were good things that were said. And I must say this. None of the congressmen and the panelists seemed to know anything about the subject at all when they got there, judging by their questions. And by the time we were finished, I think they recognized that there is a problem here worthy of our attention. And what was interesting to me is what they recommended was not that we go to Congress, but go to the United Nations.
Yes, yes.
Mm-hmm. And I happen to be, I think, one of the few survivors of the testimony given at the United Nations back in the late 70s. The General Assembly had a hearing, and I was there. We were very well received. The United States put the kibosh on doing anything about it. So that was interesting. And so I don't know how it's going to turn out, but I am not expecting that suddenly everybody's going to put their data out on the table.
That's perfectly timed. And look, Stan, we're just about to hit the end. There's the music. Thank you so much for being with us and taking the time out to be on our show. And for all the listeners, we'll see you next week. Hopefully we've got Jason Martell on. Enjoy, and email us and contact us during the week if you have any questions. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you, and thank you, Stanton. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome.